Welcome, this is Lana. Thanks for joining us. With me is returning guest and philosopher Seth Cooper, a lifelong devotee of fantasy and mythology who earned a philosophy degree in 2001. He lives by himself in the rural northern neck of Virginia, where he wrote his debut novel, The Glorious Path. This show is about 1 hour and 45 minutes, so longer than the usual. We'll begin on the roots of egalitarianism. Seth provides the weak argument for it versus aristocratic values which are based on hierarchy. Fascism, what is it? Seth shares 5 typical aspects, and we talk about why egalitarians are so terrified of it, believing the Hollywood version of what it means to be a fascist. We're fighting in a battle of values. Later on, we reflect on the alt-right and where it's going. What needs to happen next? Seth Cooper, welcome back. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Lana. I appreciate the opportunity to be back and look forward to the talk.
Me too. So what did you think when you saw your friend Eric in the Atlantic video that's, I don't know, I think it's been seen about 100 million times by now, at least around the world?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I wasn't that surprised because I had watched the live stream. So I had been seeing Eric mingling with that crowd at that event for like 10 hours. So, I couldn't have predicted what bits the media, were going to single out and turn into this nightmare or whatever. But I guess I could have, because it's when the hands flew up in the air. So, of course, they're going to ignore everything else and just pinpoint some histrionic moment during the event.
Did you have a laugh though when you said Eric like perfectly turns right there? It's almost like someone said, "Hey, Eric," and then it turns around.
It almost seemed coordinated, but it wasn't. I guess the way I tried to evaluate what was going on was, what if I had been there and I also had signed the release and my face had shown up? I probably what had happened to Eric and Heather probably would not have happened to me, honestly, because I don't really have.
You're a hermit.
Yeah, and what friends I do have don't give a damn whether I would have. Yeah, they would have probably approved of my going there, and even my family members. So it's easy for me to act indifferent or above it all when I wouldn't really have had anything to risk. But at the end of the day, I do think it's ridiculous what's happened, and with friends like Heather's, who needs enemies, really?
I know, exactly. It's funny. And then I told you before we started this how it was a whole big deal that hailed Trump, but when Castro just died, everyone said hail Castro, and that was no problem. And he actually murdered people, but Richard Spencer hasn't even hurt a fly. So.
Yeah, the double standard's ridiculous. I mean, it's I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I guess it's just party line thinking. It's just blue team versus red team. So, if whatever's done in the name of the red team is okay, even if you are a maniacal communistic leader who has a track record of killing people. As long as he's on the red team, hey.
I know, God. Well, the last time you were on, there was so much we left out, wanted to expand upon, and it's tough to get to know someone for the first time and then say, okay, well, let's break down egalitarianism and fascism. 1 hour, let's go, But we're going to try and squeeze in a lot into this talk, and one of those words that we can't get away from in our current establishment is equality. So I think we should dive into egalitarianism, and what is it?
That is a good place to start, actually. I guess even just from a pure academic stance, and I guess more specifically a philosophical beginning point, usually is something as elementary as just what is it? What is the thing we're talking about? Basically, to ask what the thing is, what is egalitarianism? It sort of reduces to asking what people mean when they uphold it. When it's evaluated in a society, when it's put forward as a value and held as a value in society, what is it that they are upholding? You can answer that question in a twofold way. You can answer that question to say that it's the doctrine or proposition that all men are equal in a given society, or so that would be A, that all men are equal, or B, that men ought to be treated as equal.
Yeah, exactly. Equal under the law, I think, is much different than saying we're all created equal, which is an absurd thing to believe because we're not.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just false. If that's if you're going with option A, unfortunately, truth is not on your side in that one. I mean, it's just anti-empirical. Any amount of anecdotal experience would show that it's false. And then science itself, biology shows that what nature produces are gradations, not flat lines. Gradations, not equality. And like it or not, nothing has evolved in order to suit modern sensibilities or moral feelings, especially modern ones. Evolution tends to produce hierarchy, and modernity produces ideals contrary to that. So we as modern people, living in liberal societies, are in this weird predicament where we are committed to holding to ideals which in themselves are contrary to the way of nature.
Yeah, so when a liberal says egalitarian or equality, what do you think that they're saying? What do you think they mean?
I think most of them haven't even thought out that point, whether we're talking about a fact statement or a value statement. Maybe with a little investigation or something, they would realize that this question is before them. But I guess the ones who have thought about it, and no doubt there are many, but probably go with option B. Like they realize men are not, people are not in fact equal, but nonetheless, we have some sort of like social contract obligation or duty to act as if everybody is equal and base customs and practices and laws and an ethos on that ideal.
Yeah, I mean, now it's, this person has something. They have more money, they have wealth, and this person doesn't. Oh my God, there's inequality. We have to level this out. So we basically have to take it from the person who has it and give it to the one who doesn't have it, and then we'll all be equal. I mean, this is what they do.
Right. And egalitarianism is even within academic circles, it's basically held to be the most fundamental moral judgment that we have. If you're a professional philosopher, you could seriously jeopardize your reputation as a serious philosopher by even daring to question egalitarianism. I guess the death of Socrates set that precedent of questioning what society holds to be cherished and then facing capital punishment for doing so. But I don't even think that for most people living in liberal societies, it's even a topic that it's occurred to them to even question.
Yeah, and it's funny because even thinking in terms of equality under the law, that's not even true because there's some people now, a lot of non-Europeans, that are getting a leg up and getting away with things that this other class of people is not getting. So they're actually pushing inequality while they're saying, oh, it's egalitarianism.
Yeah, that is funny how you can work it. On the one hand, claim outwardly that egalitarianism is your foremost value, but then the things you're actually doing, like if you, like in this case, those of European descent are typically on the shit list today.
Yeah.
So those won't be the beneficiaries of this supposedly universal value of equality.
I forget which book it was where it was one of those good sci-fi books. There was a ballerina and she could dance well and she was better than everyone else, so they had to chain her legs down, so that the other ones could dance as well. And it's just kind of that is a good analogy because it's like if you're smarter, if you're more beautiful, if you do better, they almost have to knock those people down. They have to drag them down in the name of egalitarianism. So those that are less than can actually appear to be equal for a time.
So that sort of raises the question of why, just philosophically speaking, what sort of obligation would we have? Like, what once we dismiss the idea that men are equal, so that, like in that example, obviously that ballerina is superior in what she's doing, relative to the other ones. If we're going to go with the ideal, well, what is the philosophical argument for that ideal? I mean, why should we chain her legs or whatever? Like, why should we engage in courses of action that reinforce that ideal to make people equal, even when they're not? For one thing, as a start, to just blacklist the question out of hand, and just refuse to listen to anybody who does dare question it. That's not an argument. I mean, that's just a sign of a lack of confidence in the ideal you hold. I mean, if you're not willing to mount any sort of arguments on behalf of it, really that just shows you're not as confident in its reality as you thought you were.
Now, what are some of the non-egalitarian alternatives? I know you've spoken about aristocratic values.
That's probably the most powerful and historically relevant alternative to egalitarianism. What would a non-egalitarian value system be like? Which is sort of another way of asking, how would you win this value battle? If we're not talking about argumentation, it's just a battle of values. Well, one powerful way of doing that is to make the case for some sort of aristocratic value system, which has its base in an order of rank. An order of rank being a reflection of the factual reality of man's inequality. So first off, it doesn't see inequality as a problem. It's not seeing it as a social injustice that needs to be fixed or something. It's just ordering society in an honest way that maps onto the factual reality as it is. By the way, doesn't imply denigrating those lower.
Exactly. See, in a communist mind, they're like, oh, well, that means then that the aristocrats are constantly suppressing and holding down the little guys. But that's not true.
Right. I mean, it's not holding them down, because in being lesser, they are down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just respecting people's merits and capacities for what they are.
Just to jump in here for a second, Seth, do you also want to point out kind of what you mean by liberalism as contrasted to an aristocratic value system? Because based on talking to you before, I know that you're not just talking about leftists, quote unquote, but what makes up the entire spectrum of the current political sphere today. Right?
It's true. It's all over on both sides of our current sphere. Yeah, well, neocons also uphold egalitarianism nowadays, so it's permeating both sides, basically.
Yeah, it basically has its roots in Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, Thomas Paine, Rousseau, guys like that, who basically were reconceiving society based on the social contract theory, where and usually what ties into that is this idea of inherent rights. And it was thought of during kind of like a deistic time when particular religious traditions were not really accepted by the intellectuals at the time, but they kind of just generally held to a deistic viewpoint where a god kind of set the clockwork of the universe into motion. And because of that intelligent design, that's why the universe runs rationally, and we can form rational scientific models to explain it and all that. So they developed a political system that had as part of its presuppositions a god as like a first cause that instilled in everybody sort of rights that were just intrinsic to what they were. So metaphysical rights, natural rights that inhere in individuals just by sheer dint of their coming into existence. And because of these natural rights, that gives some sort of protection from like random despotism from monarchs, because even the monarch, no matter how powerful he is, he has to respect these God-given rights. And it also ties in with representational governments. It's basically a way of forming human societies that not dissolve, but sort of redistribute power away from concentrated embodiments like a monarch or aristocracies or something like that.
Now,
So
you were kind of getting into some of the roots of egalitarianism, some of the philosophers behind the ideas, but how did they really come in and defeat a lot of these aristocratic values? What were their arguments? I think you mentioned some of the arguments for egalitarianism.
I think the fact of the matter is that it wasn't defeated by argumentation. I think World War I, I think just sheer politics brought down. Yeah. But for one thing, and this is sort of a Nietzschean idea, I guess, but Nietzsche has this idea that the philosopher's task is to determine human destiny and be the lawgiver, especially from this existential context where we don't have this deistic God anymore guaranteeing natural rights. I mean, once you dismiss that metaphysical belief, then it becomes incumbent on human thinking and willing to create values in human society. They're not pre-given in some sort of moral world order. So basically, if that's the case, then egalitarianism would threaten that task of the philosopher of making something out of man, of furnishing man a destiny, because it would just obviate that destiny. It would be what happens is it becomes a quagmire of individualism, right? Like I can do whatever I want. I just have this inherent right to do whatever I want, so long as I'm not interfering with your inherent right to do whatever you want. And when you universalize that, it puts a stopgap on human striving, because that striving, that willing, or that law giving ends with the individual at the moment of his or her death. I mean, nothing more, I mean, you're free to have whatever little hobby you want, as long as it doesn't interfere with somebody else's hobby or whatever. But no matter how much importance you place in what you've centered your life around, it ends with you. That's sort of the inbuilt futility of rabid individualism, which I see as largely characterizing the world we have today. Like, to illustrate the point I'm trying to make, there are two different ways to overcome or dismiss white guilt, if you know what I mean by that.
Oh yeah, of course we do. Most people listening to this show, they know what that means.
Yeah, that was probably a needless rhetorical question there, but and I've heard this online before, like from people like T.J. Kirk, whose moniker is the Amazing Atheist. I've heard him say before, because he gets upset at social justice warriors too, who malign the white race because of the so-called evils of their ancestors and everything, as if minority groups are owed something by present-day whites for the things of the past. Well, his attitude, which kind of reflects the individualistic attitude I was just talking about, is, well, my forebears mean nothing to me. And they're not me. I'm my own guy. I make my own decisions. They have nothing to do with me. Whereas what I would call like the aristocratic way of overcoming white guilt or dismissing it would be something more like, my forebears did such and such to make the present moment possible, including the evil, and I'm proud of it. And I have inherited all of that, evil and all. And they do have something to do with me, because their victories made possible the present moment such as it is. And this kind of ties in to the philosopher G.E. Moore, who's a British philosopher. He has this famous quip against altruism, which ties in to egalitarianism, obviously. He said, in response to insipid statement that the point of existence is to help others, he said, well, what are the others for? Yeah, let that one sink in. There is a nuance to, like, one thing I should add to this idea of aristocratic values, though, is that there, and Nietzsche talks about this, you have equality within rank. With Nietzsche's term, the Latin term inter pares, so among equals.
Now, what are some of the best arguments against aristocratic values?
Well, in the history of philosophy, there are three main ethical theories. Probably the most famous one, or not famous, but the most popular one today, and it's so pervasive that most people don't even realize that their thinking is bound up with it, is utilitarianism, which was, well, I won't get into the whole history of that, but basically the formulation of that is whenever you're deciding what course of action to do, always do the one that creates the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. And good here meaning happiness, and basically happiness meaning pleasure, although that's where it gets hairy. That can't stand as a counter argument to these the aristocratic value system I'm talking about as a superior alternative to egalitarianism, which I see as deadening and stifling to the human will, because that formula I just said about maximizing the greatest amount of happiness for the maximal amount of people already presupposes that men are equal. So that just begs the question. Like, in order to execute the utilitarian formula, you have to already act as if men are equal. So that doesn't get you anywhere. Another major or predominant moral theory is virtue ethics, which Aristotle is the most famous proponent of, and his most famous work expressing these ideas is found in the Nicomachean Ethics. But that too isn't going to, like, don't go there if you're trying to find reasons against an aristocratic value system, because in Aristotle's world and his own presuppositions and the audience he thought he was writing to, that was totally aristocratic. Kant probably furnishes the best argument that, at least that I'm aware of, in favor of egalitarianism, and that would basically be summed up that we should adopt a sort of Kantian regard for universal human dignity, which is another way of saying that it's necessary to act as if all men are equal out of respect for the dignity of all rational creatures in egalitarian societies. They don't want in upper strata of society, but anyway, if it is necessary to act this way, then even the higher types would require an egalitarian society to flourish. And so the thinking goes, then aristocratic societies would stifle the flourishing of higher types. So it actually behooves even aristocrats to live in an egalitarian society. That's the argument. My response to that is that just seems like nonsense to me.
Yeah.
It's a meaningless assertion of necessity to say that we have to act that way. It almost seems like you're asserting that necessity just for the sake of having a counter argument for it. Because in the scenario that I just described, where the higher types actually benefit from an egalitarian society, the higher types are posited as existing in that scenario. So
yeah.
That would mean that meaning A above the fact statement is false. And it would also mean that adopting meaning B, which is that we ought to have the ideal of acting as if everybody is equal, uh, so it would mean adopting B, but that to me obviously raises the question of, well, if we do adopt the ideal that we have to act as if everyone is equal, well, who really benefits in that scenario? In a society where everyone works to make everyone equal by initially pretending that all men are equal, well, it's not the higher types.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
All right, now let's go to the complete opposite side of this political spectrum, if you will, and let's talk about fascism. What can you tell us about fascism?
I think my goal here in talking about fascism, at least partly, is about sort of taking the sting out of the stigma of it, because I feel as if that remains a word that has some bite to it,
Of course.
as an insult. Like even though like the implication of being a racist has by and large lost its force because of the usefulness of it has been so watered down that it can't even really serve as an insult at this.
It's true. When I was, younger, I used to tell my mom, "Stop being such a fascist." And now it's like, well, actually, I was complimenting her when I was saying that. I just didn't know it yet. And then I saw also on Twitter, and she would get so mad when I called her, "Stop being a fascist." Right? And then I was on Twitter the other day, and Merriam-Webster, the dictionary, they had tweeted, they said, "Fascism is still our #1 lookup." So number of lookups equals how they choose the word of the year. So I take it it's going to be the word of the year. So they're like, there's still time to look something else up. That everyone is searching for a definition for it. I mean, clearly.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's because it's the way thinking or the political climate has coalesced into something where fascism has become the blackguard. It's just everyone's in agreement.
Yeah, everyone thinks Trump.
Most people's in agreement.
Everyone thinks Trump is a fascist, right? They think it's the fascist states of America now. Yeah, right.
I don't know if they think that, because in order to think that Trump or anybody else is a fascist, you first have to know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think it's just more a willingness to throw that label around. I mean, I'm not sure if, like once the rabble just overuse the word and it just becomes sloppy like that, it pretty much just becomes synonymous with evil or something like that, or whatever must be destroyed.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, you have neocons or libertarians who call the left, "Oh, you're being fascists," just when they're trying to shut down free speech. So what are the aspects of fascism?
Yeah, okay. And these aspects, by the way, they're not things that I necessarily think are essential to it. It's just the result of my research on the topic. So it tends to be these 5 things that tend to be connected to the idea of fascism. So the first one would be military dictatorship. That's what that's one thing that most people connect to it, and that would be this idea that there's a regime centered around some sort of charismatic figure who wields the power of the army at his behest. But in being a charismatic figurehead, he represents the entire force of the government to the people in his own person. And once again, this is neither praise nor criticism. It's just a description. But so basically, having a central figurehead there is a convenient way to embody a government, to so that the people can look up and see one guy standing there, and rather than being like an abstract senate or something like that, where it's a collection of oligarchs or something, because you can't just look at the Senate. You would you would see a building, or you would see a bunch of guys
I
or
think
something.
it's easier when it's one man because then you know who to blame. It's just like in the old Viking communities, the king. We knew who the king was, and if he screwed up, everyone knew who to blame. And in fact, they would go after him if he screwed up and replace him with a new king.
Yeah, I mean, it cuts both ways because, right? I mean, if it's centered in one figure, then all the blame can go into that guy, but also all the praise. I mean, if he does a good job.
Yeah.
So, anyway, there's that aspect of it. A second one I would call authoritarian. So usually, what happens or has happened is that some sort of strong control is exerted in order to undo or reverse effects of some recent turmoil. So there'll be some social tragedy or defeat or something, and it's in the throes of that sort of fear or turmoil that the people become more willing to accept the exertion of strong control to quickly solve the problem. And in the past, this can lead to scapegoating, as it's called, which is sort of defined as like the wrongful attribution of instability or something to a group or some sort of social challenge or a class or something. And of course, the detractors of fascism always ad nauseum go to the scapegoating thing as a reason why it's inherently reprehensible or something like that. But I'll talk more about that later. I'm just trying to get through these like objective points.
Okay, so dictatorship, authoritarian, and then what's the third one?
The third one, and I sort of struggled to come up with like a one word to capture this aspect of it, but the word I came up with was, I mean, it's not my coinage, but whatever, corporatism. And the briefest way I could come up with to sort of like render this into a formula would be that corporatism is sort of like a hybrid of socialism and capitalism, with the aim of unifying a country. So fascism is very good at, like, whatever else may be said about it, it's very good at unifying a people. And corporatism is generally the socio-political structure that arises from that unification, and its aims are over and above the mere economic aims of either socialism or capitalism for their own sake. So it's kind of funny you mentioned calling your mother a fascist as a child, because if you think about it, the family structure, at least the traditional one, is a form of corporatism, right? Because not everybody's equal, but yet there is a sort of pyramidal form to it, and everybody has their place in the family. But unlike capitalism, not everybody's out on his own. It's not an individualistic structure, nor is it a sheer communistic one.
It's true. And this is one thing, I've heard a lot of people in the conspiracy area say, well, America is fascist. Look at, these corporations and what they're doing. They're all fascist. And it's like, no, in a fascist economic system, the government is ruling over corporations. But in America now you have,
right,
corporations that are dictating to the government what's going on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I would say a business corporation, in itself, is in a way, I wouldn't call it fascism, but for the very reason you said, but it is a form of corporatism. It's just that it's a form of corporatism lying outside the goals of the government. Mm-hmm. So it's whatever it's for, and if it's a capitalistic thing, it's just going to be about It's just going to be this raging machine all about the acquisition of as much capital as its end goal.
In a fascist system, economically speaking, the underlying principle would be, is it good for the people, right? Is this good for the people? Yeah. And if not, then we don't allow it.
Right.
And for me, I would put McDonald's in that. Let's judge it. Can this corporation stand? Is it good for the people? No, it's toxic. It's bad. Let's get rid of it. Okay, done. I mean, that would be great. Authoritarianism is great when it's your people running things, of course, right?
Yeah, that's the thing that you can't separate out of this picture. It has to be for the interest of the folk. I mean, if you leave that element out of it, none of this is going to make any sense.
Yeah.
So anyway, like I had a few other examples, like branches of the military, guild, like craft or trade guilds, like the medieval guilds. That they were a form of corporatism, trade syndicates. Basically any organization where individuals, I mean, it's made out of individuals, but their contribution lies in fulfilling the role that they have in it. So corporatism, the root word there is the Latin word corpus, body. So it just an intuitive way of thinking about it is any organism's body, where you have various parts all working together to unify it into a whole, right? Like a body isn't all just a bunch of fingers, or it's not all just skin cells. It's all these various components put into the service of unifying a whole. So honestly, I mean, if we're talking about the good of the folk or the people, it's the flip side of that coin, however, because it's not really populism that we're talking about here. The summum bonum, or the highest good here, would be the body, the larger body that emerges out of having all these individuals operating in their order of rank. I'll be, according to the authoritarian structure that the fascist state consists in. So we're not just, and this, I'll just jump to this point right now since I kind of wandered into it. That may be the hardest pill for modernity to swallow. Like people who are so used to liberal thinking, where basically the rejection of the utilitarian principle I was talking about earlier, that man's value. Man doesn't have any value in himself. His value is derived from his serviceability to the task.
Yep.
And that just chaffs if you're not to the extent to which you're conditioned to thinking as a liberal, it will be the extent to which that chaffs you the wrong way. So that might be, but anyway, that's point 3. The fourth one, or the fourth aspect, which always seems to come into discussions about what fascism is imperialism. And basically what this serves to do is it tends to rejuvenate morale for a fatherland. And that morale oftentimes has taken the form of pushing the extent of rule into foreign countries. And that push to grow national boundaries at the same time overcomes a national indolence. In other words, where citizens sort of take for granted the power of the state, and sort of just expect to derive privileges from it, even to the point where, like what we face today is not even just indolence, but outright hostility to it, where you should actually apologize for being nationalistic. being so rejuvenated, having a morale so rejuvenated that you're actually willing to expand your nationalistic boundaries. That's when you're, as with any other thing, caught up in the will to power. Anything that's not growing is dying. So I mean, you can look at a tree or anything. I mean, to the extent that a tree is alive, it's reaching forth, gathering more nourishment, reaching deeper into the soil. The individual, at the human level, right? You're either growing into adulthood or you're shrinking towards being a geriatric and then ending up 6 feet under.
Yep.
So, I mean, the same measure of prosperity can be grafted onto a nation state itself. That too can be something that can be hard to hear by today's sort of conciliatory liberal standards. But it is the case, whether you like it or not.
Now, the last point you have on here, too, is xenophobia, right? And that can go, when I look at fascism, I think there's two counterparts. There's the social aspects, and then there's the economic aspects. Xenophobia, that's perfectly healthy. People have always fought for territory and fought for tribe, but I think xenophobia would go into social and economic. It would fit into both those categories.
Yeah, obviously, the xeno part, you and I probably wouldn't have any problem with. The phobia part is,
of course, yeah.
It's and honestly, out of these 5 points, the xenophobia to me seems the most ideologically laden and the most spurious, because but I include it on the list because, once again, every time I've looked into what other people are saying fascism is, it recurs without fail. So I had to include it on the list.
Yeah, it's like we're not phobic. We're not afraid, or people who have these ideas they're not afraid. They just prefer to be with their own people. I mean, this is ancient. The idea of having a tribe and fighting for territory and your people. I mean, you're never going to stop that. Every other people has that. It's just white people that don't have that anymore.
Yeah, that's to me, that's what's sort of ironic. I haven't really, I guess, got to this point yet, but it's also just kind of funny that that fascism can be blamed for being overly aggressive and overstepping its bounds, yet at the same time being driven by fears, of other people. I mean, make up your mind. Which is it? Yeah. Are fascists afraid of other people, or are they crazy warmongers that will just step in and take over?
Exactly.
But it sounds more like other people are afraid of fascists.
Yeah, fasciphobia. That's what they are. Fasciphobic.
Sounds like
right, which is supposed to generate like a second order fear of being branded as that. Like, so we're being conditioned to be afraid of being called xenophobic.
Oh, yeah.
It's like 2 layers of fear there, but basically how it's usually how xenophobia is characterized as belonging to fascism is that while fascism unifies a people, it does so by forming a national identity that blames the misfortunes on some scapegoat, supposedly some minority, which supposedly leads to the sense that supposedly leads to the sense of the inherent greatness of the state or the leader. So those are the 5 things I've come across.
Leftists, they don't possess, and a lot of anti-whites, they don't possess the understanding or have a desire for a unity of folk. So they don't understand this idea of working together for a higher goal. A lot of times they just see fascism as, oh, it's just slavery and force and suppression, and they're making me do this. I mean, just like when they look at National Socialists or Mussolini, they act like everyone was just mind-controlled and only acting as a unit because there was this threat looming over them. They can't understand this kind of unity and love for folk. They really can't. That's why they just always see it as some kind of evil force. But what are some of the arguments against fascism?
Okay, well, one here is that it eliminates differences or suppresses the rights of individuals to disagree with collective decisions. So, if the fascist state agrees on some policy or something, you as the individual are just up the creek without a paddle to do anything about that, and it would just imperil you to speak out against it. My response to that, though, and this kind of ties in with what you just said, Lana, because when people, well, I say people, but generally Marxists and leftists, when they deride fascism and look at historical examples of it, like the Italian fascists you just mentioned, they always act like the charge is always that the leader is just some self-centered, power-hungry guy who is like faking it, like he himself doesn't have any national identity or anything like that. Like it's being interpreted through the lens of capital individualism. Like, oh, he's just an individual concerned with his acquisitions, and he's faking which always, to me, creates this baffling situation of, well, how do you explain the fervor of all the people supporting him? I mean, if they're just under the thumb and oppressed, how do you, like, are they faking it too?
Yeah.
All of their morale and enthusiasm, all of that is just charades, apparently. But
yeah, I've literally heard people say, like Hitler and Mussolini, they had these secret evil occult powers and they were mind controlling people, and they just go to great lengths to try and not understand this unity of folk working together for a higher goal. They just don't understand it because Marxists and our current establishment just doesn't even let people think that. So before, you're saying that, a lot of people, the arguments against fascism is because I can't have my own view, I can't come against the collective. Well, they're in power. They don't allow their enemies or contradictory viewpoints to speak out either, right?
Exactly. And it's like, how do you explain the fact that, I mean, one guy, Hitler, one guy, yet he had millions of German soldiers at his command. Obviously, those soldiers had some vested interest in seeing Germany succeed. They weren't just drones taking orders, under the thumb of the threat of death or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, like you couldn't command battalions to march towards Moscow. There would just be instant mutiny at that point if they had no vested interest, if they did not share at all the vision and goals of their own leader. It just wouldn't work. So basically, the conceptual rejoinder here is that fascism is built around a goal of some sort, and that goal is the heart and soul of the people as a people, and it supersedes the supposed right of individuals to destroy that goal. Remember, I already laid out a scenario in which we have no reason to believe that individuals just have various rights instilled in them metaphysically just by dint of their existences.
Yeah.
So their rights derive from the goal that fascism would embody. So I would say that fascism is an effective means for achieving national ends, where the individual right to foil everything absolutely is a metaphysical fantasy. I mean that's basically the dream of the anarchist, right? Where like somehow the anarchist is fulfilling God's will or some higher end, some noble cause or something by always bringing down power structures.
Yeah.
I mean, like Star Wars is a classic example of that. I mean, why exactly are the Imperial forces bad? Why? Because they have British accents and sort of march like Nazis or something.
Yeah.
But
Because
it's just
it's order.
inherently,
It's some kind of order, and Marxists
yeah.
they hate order. They just want to be able to shit in the streets and do every degenerate thing possible anywhere they want at all times, and just get their basic income and just masturbate till they die, basically.
Right, and that hubris springs from, I think it's a remnant of the classical liberal ideas that you just have inherent worth. But with the moment that doctrine is shaken, I mean, you have to think again. Because what they're sort of doing is hiding behind this moral ruse that, well, even if I'm destructive to the goals of the people, somehow I'm inherently justified in doing that because the moral reality is on my side or something. But if there is no such moral reality, and I agree with Nietzsche on that point, I don't know, listeners might think I'm off my rocker for thinking this, but I just agree with Nietzsche's dictum that there are no moral facts. So, the anarchist, the revolutionary, the nihilist, from my point of view, don't really have any objective leg to stand on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they disqualify their right to existence in becoming an enemy to the goal of the folk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is why I hate when some people try and compare the left to fascists. It's like, no, it's completely opposite. I mean, they're globalists. They want to destroy everything. They're total degenerates, whereas fascism would be, nationalists. They're based in biology and nature, and they're actually thinking about what is best for the people and preserving things like the family unit and letting the smarter ones lead the society to take us to better places, And really, humans do thrive in, at least I do, I've found in my life, having some order, some goals, some discipline. Otherwise, I feel like crap if I don't have that. I really do.
Yeah, you just languish, and it just brings up all these Camus-esque questions about the point of existence.
Yeah, and people get depressed. Obviously, look at our modern society. All these people have this weird anxiety and depression, and it's like there's no more order and focus and true goals anymore, other than just a bunch of degenerate, meaningless things.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to have any serious goals when you're taught, that what it even means to have a goal is just limited to what you are as an individual. Exactly. I mean, I think individualism breeds that depression and sense of futility, because we're living in a society exactly structured on limiting the efficacy of a goal. Mm-hmm. It has to begin and end with you.
And when there is some kind of group goal, it's something stupid like fighting for gender-neutral bathrooms.
Right.
I mean, yay,
Okay, but see, that's not a goal. I mean, that too is nihilistic, because when you say gender-neutral, I mean, neuter is just the Latin word that means neither. So that's not a gender. It's just negating something. Basically, we're living in a world where the only goal you're allowed to have is to not have goals.
Yeah, they fight for the right to die, basically. To die in these different ways.
This is not even to say that it's just these these horrible, well, at least like what in this conversation have been described as like the rabid anarchists, for instance, who are put in this position. It's also everyone else, because there is no national goal, really.
Yeah.
So it's not. You don't have to be someone pushing the front lines of like a communist agenda to be wrapped up in this situation. it's practically everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, now they do have goals of multiculturalism and just this one global order. And then what? Then what happens? Then it all just turns into a bunch of goo, right? I mean, what happens?
Well, multiculturalism, that sounds like it's a positive thing. Like, at the prima facie level, it sounds like, oh, good, we're opening our minds and our arms, and we're willing to examine the merits of other traditions from foreign parts of the world. But the logical consequence of that is you end up indifferent to all cultures.
Yeah.
Because you're not allowed to set them in an order of rank or pass any judgment on them, because if you do that, oh well, you're just exercising prejudices from your cultural heritage. So the net result of this thing that ostensibly is supposed to be positive for all cultures is just a nihilistic indifference or apathy to all of them, including yours. Unfortunately, it's taken decades to realize that that's the effect of it. But
yeah, and then when we're united under capitalism, basically, because you've got these globalists that are pushing that, then you just have Big Macs and the same Hollywood movies everywhere, and then that just kills all the differences anyway.
Right.
Then there's no difference left, and then it's back to something nihilistic.
Yeah. The thing is, though, every time there's a power vacuum, somebody's going to step in and fill it. I think we know who is basically in charge of pumping degenerate memes into society through Hollywood. I don't think that takes a good deal of investigation to bring into light. But anyway, I have the second objection, Lana, I have in my notes here is that fascism arises only as an effort to scapegoat. Now, my answer to that would be that if that's true, like even if it's true, which I don't even grant that it is, like I don't think Spanish fascism or German nationalism or Italian, any form of it that actually has arisen in history is just a knee-jerk reaction to scapegoating. But even if it were true, that would just be a contingent truth. In other words, it would just be an accident of particular historical examples. So it would be and remains to be quite possible for fascism to arise not on the basis of blame for national woes or even on the woes themselves, but once again on a goal.
Yeah.
Whose object the people would yearn for. So it would have it's not impossible for fascism to have that sort of positive basis and be a draw into the future right out of the gate without any scapegoating involved. So to whatever extent scapegoating has been mingled in with the history of fascism, it's not necessary.
No, of course not. No, it's a system that's working for the people, for the tribe, and it doesn't matter who's on the outside. It's for that tribe. They don't need to be blaming other people over their other tribes in order to exist. I also say that it's not authoritarian to me when it's a system that I agree with. Then it's a happy system to me, right?
If some sort of state achieves its ends well through scapegoating, like if scapegoating can sink its teeth into fascism and fulfill objectives, as it were, through it, that even that in itself is not necessarily a condemnation of fascism, because all that's really doing is showing that fascism is an effective form of human society for whatever sinks its teeth into it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, scapegoating, it may not work as well in a liberal society, but that's not necessarily in favor of liberalism. That's just saying that liberalism and basically democratic republics are clumsy and ineffectual. So I mean, it cuts both ways. It's sort of like, it's trying to have your cake and eat it too. There, you want to blame fascism for its effectiveness, but when something proves its effectiveness, then you blame fascism for that thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, another one I have here is that, and I guess I've touched on this a little bit, but that leaders in fascistic structures are aggressive or indifferent to the populace or assume control over life and death, and that's a no-no. And once again, my response to this, which is kind of a recurring mantra, is that it pertains to the goals of the people. That's always left out of all these objections. They never think about human willing in the structures of the will to power in the form of a state or a nation in terms of a goal. That's always left out. So I mean, insofar as the leader that we're browbeating here is being too aggressive or whatever, insofar as that leader is committed to the goal of the people, which, by the way, is not happiness for the people, because we've already dealt with the utilitarian principle, then he won't squander the serviceability of any segment of the populace. I mean, that would just be impractical. It would be inefficient. And the moment that the wielding of power would cease to belong to any rationale other than its own wielding, just like the leader just becomes just an arbitrary power grabber, then the regime would just begin to face the threat of revolution from within, and not due to natural rights, but just because the servants will go haywire, because they'll be bereft of their figurehead at that point.
Exactly.
They won't trust him to carry forth the goals that they themselves have a vested interest in.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense. And for us, it's so hard to imagine that these people, they so loved Mussolini or they so loved Hitler in that era, because we can't understand having a leader that actually looks out for our interests. We haven't experienced that in our lifetime. We haven't experienced the unity of folk, certainly not in America, of, in our lifetimes, of what that would feel like and what that system could be. I mean, imagine being in a system of, people, a lot of people that thought like you and I, and we were the nation and we were working for amazing goals. We would be out in space. We'd be doing so many incredible things instead of fighting for gender neutral bathrooms, and it's just, I mean, I get blown away when I think about that. I mean, I want that. You want that. A lot of other people want to experience that. And then it's kind of fishy that the current system has spent billions of dollars of propaganda and being so anti-fascist. They're so terrified of that, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, historical facts always disrupt that sort of thinking. Like if fascism, like the Hitler example, how do they explain the fact that in Pennsylvania in the 1930s, there was widespread support for Hitler's regime among U.S. citizens? And, because there was a heavy Germanic presence in Pennsylvania, and still is to some extent.
And that's right. It's more, and here's the other thing. People say, oh, it's racist. No, they were very ethnic, tribal minded. It was more of a ethno-nationalism, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is the rationale for their support.
Yeah. Italians didn't want a bunch of French people or a bunch of Russian people coming to live there. It's ethno-nationalism. So I don't understand why people say, oh, but it's racist. It's like, well, they didn't want other white people living there either. They wanted their own tribe living there. And it's like, if we think of tribes in New Guinea or something, if you just ask people, what if, a million white people just started flooding into this New Guinea tribe? And it's like, well, open your arms to diversity. They would never support that. They would never support it. But for some reason, it only works in our direction, right?
Yeah. I mean, I sort of think of, we've been tossing these terms around like a people and a folk and a tribe. I guess, well, folk and people just literally pretty much mean the same thing. I guess I sort of see a tribe as like a successful, or a people as a successful tribe. one that has grown out of an infantile state into a recognizable force of power. Whereas a tribe, it seems to imply some sort of parochialism or something.
Or running around in loincloths with spears or something.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, not necessarily like a technological level, but just like I sort of see a tribe as a people on the way, like a burgeoning, like something that if it succeeds would become a people.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I guess a tribe would be kind of like the people spearheading something, right? And then it leads into something greater.
Right, and it's I would say I mean, obviously, there's a racial component there, and I think it's just natural that people belonging to the same ethnicity would be predisposed to sharing the same goals.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's kind of a convenient segue to this other thing that I keep running up against.
Sure, let's do it.
Which is that fascism leads to pointless militarism and/or conflict. And my response to that, even though it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse here, is that will always be the interpretation from the outside. That from those who care nothing for the goal of the people, it will seem like pointlessness. It'll just seem like arbitrary aggression. But to the people, it will not be pointless. In fact, anything done for the sake of that goal will be what it means to have a point.
Exactly. It's like we're letting the whiner on the outside who's not being allowed in, who wants in, say, stop being such a bully so I can get in there and ruin what you're doing, right?
Yeah. And it's right. And yet, this is an aspect of this whole conversation I haven't really brought up yet, but really, to me, it seems like fascism is something on a gradient where, to the extent that a country or something has any sort of law and order and control and has clear boundaries set for itself, both political and physical, like having actual boundaries that who knows maybe can be protected by, God forbid, a wall.
Yeah, it's like not having boundaries just means you're a whore to everybody. Let's face it,
To just have weak boundaries and ill-defined goals and everything is the cost you pay in order to appear non-arbitrary from the liberal point of view. But basically, any country, to the extent that it has those bounds or whatever, is fascistic. I mean, the U.S. seal with the eagle in its left talons, it's holding a fasces, for God's sakes, of 13 arrows.
Oh yeah, a lot of conspiracy symbolism people point to that all the time. But America is not fascist, though. Even though maybe long ago, I don't know. Why do you think they put that symbol in there?
Why did they? I mean, obviously it wasn't to be some sort of underhanded implication for fascism, because I mean, fascism is a 20th century phenomenon. But I mean, it's a symbol for unity. I guess maybe the arrows represented the original colonies, so it's a way of saying it's 13 distinct colonies, but while being clutched in the talons of the eagle, it's a way of saying, but they're bound under the law and order of the federal power.
That makes sense.
But to bring it to a modern example, what is exactly, because remember this point was all about the arbitrary militarism alleged against fascism. Well, what exactly is non-arbitrary at bottom and from a super historical perspective of all the violence done on behalf of the state of Israel?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what makes that non-arbitrary? Like, if we're going to talk about pointless militarism, well, what about that? I mean, for some reason, that country is just by default an exception.
That's what we're always asking over here. Yes.
to those who detract from fascism, the point with the xenophobia thing is that it creates a nationalistic fervor that actually blinds the people to the real sources of their problems by propping up scapegoats. So you prop up this straw man. It's like a tactic supposedly put forward by the leaders to distract people from the source of the real source of their problems. But you know, so to go back to the scapegoat problem, again, to echo that rejoinder, I mean, my perspective on this is that it presupposes a regime that's founded on fear and turmoil, which, I mean, once again, those are contingent historical examples. Like it could be that fascism in the 20th century has arisen under those sorts of conditions that conveniently let it or were prone to setting up a scapegoat. But that seems unnecessary to me. And the fervor which appears wherever organization exists, it doesn't become any more or less blinding when it occurs in fascism. It's just picking on fascism. It's just being scared. You're seeing all the salutes, you're seeing all the nationalistic fervor, and because you're on the outside and you don't like it, you just accuse it of being blinding.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, that could occur when even if you're saluting Castro, like you mentioned. Of
course, yeah. And it's also this idea that you look at these people and they love their own with all this fervor and they're so excited and zealous. So it means right away that how many times have we heard this? It means that they really hate and fear others. So the solution to that is for them to hate themselves and to hate their own people. And then we won't have fascism, then we'll be safe. So if you hate your own people, you're okay.
Yeah, right. Because then you've proved yourself to the world that you're harmless and you're enlightened or something. You have a global perspective, and really the cost of doing that is the substance of your spirit. Really, you just become an empty shell. Like you said, waiting around to die. I mean,
yeah, that's what I mean. The ultimate psychological warfare when they're like conditioning you to want to turn on your own self and your own people. Right. I mean, wow.
Yeah, that does seem to be the pathos fueling all of this. It's self-hatred, hatred for yourself, hatred for the group you belong to, hatred for the history out of which you've come. It's a pretty despicable state of affairs, really.
Yeah, and it's so much conditioning and billions of dollars of propaganda. It's like, you can't love white people, you can't have pride because it's going to lead to mass murder, so just don't let yourself do it, right? That's basically what they say. That's what they teach in school, what they say on the news.
Right. Well, the ironic thing, though, is that evidently not being that way also leads to mass murder. So that might just be
exactly, but that's the mass murder that's the mass murder that they want. So that's okay. Yeah. See.
Exactly.
We should just admit at this point. Yeah, just admit at this point. Both sides have strong wills. Both sides are capable of violence. It's just the story of humanity, right? War and conquest, and violence. It's just you're never going to change that.
Yeah, exactly. And like somehow fascism gets scapegoated as the thing that is like the seed of evil or something. And if only we expunged fascistic tendencies out of human history, we would finally have a hedonistic utopia that evidently all the Marxists want. No, that's a delusion. That'll never be the case. War is a fact of existence, and it's a matter of fighting for something rather than fighting for nothing.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of nationalists say that, if you allow other nations to be nationalistic and just worry about their own, this actually will give us peace. It's when you're trying to force all these people together and destroying sovereign nations that leads to more war. It's really quite easy to understand.
Right. I have a brief, like a 10-line quote about fascism, Lana, if I could read it. It actually came from somebody named Marshall Ironsides. I don't really know who he is, except that I took it from Quora.com.
Okay.
I thought it was just like a nifty formula here and just insightful. He says that fascism is more than just an effective way to establish order and loyalty to the state by its subjects. Fascism upholds a belief in the human spirit as its foundation. It is opposed to all forms of materialism. It believes in creating the safest, optimal environment for its people and for families. It upholds a belief that its citizens should prosper without ostentation. I'm not quite sure what that part means, but whatever. It upholds a belief that the public good cannot be achieved by professional politicians and their paparazzi puppets. Fascism believes that the nation should be united, working toward common goals, and free from exploitation by capitalists and communists. It does uphold a belief in violence as one of its tools. However, so do those who seek to tear the nations apart from without or within. You cannot combat terrorists with bad poems, bad coffee, and bad music.
It's so true. That is so true. It's just the sooner we realize that, and then I see there's some people, these cultural libertarians, but the left is intolerant. Yeah, everyone's intolerant when they're pushing their view, when they want their people to win, when they want their ideology to be supreme. This is face that fact, face that reality. Let's fight this war already. We're already in it. It's a different kind of war. It might not be guns. Well, it is for some people in some places, but it's very much based on ideology and how you can get people to hate themselves and destroy themselves. It's a different kind of warfare now. It's even worse. Whereas before you can just go on the battlefield and just fight, just fight and settle it right there. But now it's just this long, excruciating psychological warfare.
Right. This battle of like psychological attrition or something. I mean, the best way to achieve peace is to allow a victor to emerge. I mean, that's just how it's always been. That's how you had the Pax Romana. It didn't just fall into Rome's lap. They had to have a few triumphs first.
Well, and that's why I think it's good to have extremism on both sides, because it speeds it up. Because otherwise it's going to be slower, longer, more excruciating, Whereas this way, we can see the rapid change happen so fast, even in my lifetime, in my 30s, like all the things that I've seen is like, whoa, I can't believe it's happened that fast. Imagine when we're going to be 80, what it's going to be like if this pace continues. So I don't want it to slow down. I want it to speed up.
Right. Yeah. Drive that dialectic on. I mean, the Marxists love talking about a dialectic. So that's what I say too. Bring it on. Let's instead of just having this moldering quasi conflict that just confuses everybody. And I never quite understand. Marxism has never historically been achieved to any discernible level, so it's hard to even understand how to describe what they would even want, like the sort of just supposedly just egalitarian classless society. It's never existed, so it's hard to are they even I guess what I'm saying is, if the conflict did escalate to the point where a side was determined, I struggle to sit here and imagine what the world would be like if they prevailed in that structure.
Yeah.
In that conflict.
Oh my God. They do want a class society. They just want all the losers and the people on the bottom to be on the top.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Right. On paper, it's classless.
I think, I know we've been going for a while, but I think we should make a couple comments on if you wanted to say something about alt-right and organizing. You had a couple other points there.
Well, I have this idea. I guess I'm characterizing the emergence of the alt-right as having begun with wild organizing, meaning, I guess, analogous to wild memes in a way, where it has coalesced around the semi-like-minded, or the appearance of like-mindedness, gathering what seems to be mostly online, like up to this point, mostly an internet phenomenon. Uh, so sort of the result of like a virtual smorgasbording. But um, if left at that state, I would think it would be in danger of like whatever is coalescing there being in danger of evolving away into something unrecognizable to those who at present have the strongest conceptions of what the alt-right should be about. Because I guess everybody would more or less be in agreement that there is some haziness at this point about what exactly the alt-right is. Obviously there's a central concern about retaining European heritages and legacies like that. That's definitely an underlying value, but it seems to me like beyond that, it's a little evanescent.
I agree. I think the alt-right is at a point here where it needs to evolve into an organized group pretty quick here.
Right. And to me, that means that it has to go beyond being a wild organization into something willed. So what that would entail is the need for leaders, which, the alt-right obviously has some leaders. Leaders here meaning like those who bear the strongest conceptions of what the alt-right ought to become, that like those with the strongest ideas as for its destiny. And these people should continue. I think Spencer's doing a fine job personally so far. So I would want to see him to seize ever more control over what this is, and in doing that, give form to the gathering that has formed. And what I mean by giving form is delineating what belongs to the alt-right, what does not belong to it, what can serve, even if just temporarily, what cannot serve at all for its goals. All of which is a way of saying to dictate, if I can say that word, what is essential for it and what is being selected to last. So to avoid it from just being something that just becomes a passé internet phenomenon that everybody just chuckles at 5 years from now.
Yeah, there is a need, and I know there are a lot of people meeting in real life, and I talk about this all the time. There is a need for incognito planning, some more kind of covert plans. I think people need to be infiltrating all kinds of different areas. What do you think about this? I think that you said your line of work was in national security, right?
Yeah, it actually is. I have a top secret clearance. I've had one. What year are we in? 26 for 12
the current year.
God, 14 years now. My God. Yeah, I can't get way much into the details of that. Agencies that shall remain unnamed. I work for. I've worked for directly, and now I work for indirectly as a contractor. So I know one or two things about how espionage works and how leadership works, and what one sent, like just basic organization principles that the U.S. government uses and the FBI. That wasn't a slip. I don't work for the FBI, so. But
no, because they're very anti-white, actually. But I've heard that there's some warring. I'm going off on a tangent here, but there is some kind of warring. There's like half of people who are against and half are with kind of a lot of the globalist agenda there.
Yeah, sort of having an inside view on this a little bit. I can say it's a mixed bag, just as with almost every sphere of our society. It's you run the whole gauntlet. In the government, believe it or not. But I actually, it's funny you mentioned incognito organizing, because that's exactly what I think needs to happen, not exclusively, but I think there does need to be an element of that as the alt-right strengthens itself and continues to grow and define itself. The government has this concept called need to know, and I think that's just intuitive. Everybody, well, you would think everybody would understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, that it behooves the leaders and the non-leaders in an organization for there to be a need to know basis for what's going on. That not everything just de facto has to be transparent across the board. There has to be some opaqueness to the leadership. That and total transparency is why anarchists demand it. I mean, total transparency will bring down a power structure.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I'm imagining a coalition of leaders, burgeoning, growing, self-appointed. I'd even say like would-be oligarchs in a sense, presenting a will to power to the public in a way that would maximize recruitment.
And it's interesting you say recruitment, because right now I would say it's in the phase of recruiting. I mean, there's meetups all across the country, thousands of people. There's actually, it's a growing movement that's happening very quick. That's why some people are worried about, agents infiltrating and whatnot. But a lot of these meetups are kind of, who do you know? How can you let in? You have to be invited. Kind of, we're forming a secret society, basically. And that's what it's got to take, I think. And then you see the talent pool. Like, I've been able to go to some of these meetups, and there's some incredibly talented people. And it's about finding kind of where they fit in this war, where their talents could be best used. And then from there, exactly, you need some leaders, some captains, some people that are good, planning strategies and battle strategies, and kind of, I think people are finding their place. They're first having to get together in order to do this, to be able to have these meetings. But I'd love to see that. I'd love to see a secret society of some of the best men getting together and like planning infiltration, true grassroots, because a lot of us don't have huge budgets that the elites do. But come on, we've had tribal elite who have infiltrated with small numbers before, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's once again, if you're from the outside hearing this, it's going to sound incredibly sinister what we're talking about. but I mean, to me, it's just the facts of organizing. I mean, if you're serious about if you have this organization you're invested in, that's just how it has to happen. I feel that the need to know thing and the gathering people, the meetups and everything. I think what's happening there is it's like an inchoate people, a new folk, as it were, would emerge
exactly
from that. But I don't. I mean, without these ostensibly sinister strategies, it would fall apart. I mean, I don't think there would be any hope for it, without such tactics.
Oh, exactly, because it would be infiltrated by the other side. I mean,
right.
Come on. Yeah, and it's true. A lot of this movement in America, I almost see like long way down the road, as America's demographics really change. I see this element that's kind of, we're in the underground right now. We're a counterculture, but I almost see it emerging as a new nation that's going to separate. Because America is not going to ever be the same.
No.
So it might even be some kind of a secessionist type movement or some other kind of thing. But that has to be done legally, politically. That means you need troops in all those positions to help make those things happen, right?
Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, I guess like a meta objective that I'm trying to achieve here it was something I mentioned earlier, which is to diffuse the stigma of fascism. Because if we can make it seem less like the boogeyman that the leftists have made it, then it would become more acceptable at the mainstream level. And I mean, who knows, maybe it's not inconceivable for there to be a fascist party that's taken seriously, that actually stands a chance of winning the White House one day.
Yeah, because, now I'm meeting people who aren't Europeans who are actually supporting the alt-right, because they see that it's actually a movement that could be good for them in the long run too. And I agree with that. I think that our movement, because Marxists are just so destroying everything. They're just going to ruin everything, ruin the world if we don't stop them. And there's people that realize that this is a war. This is serious. I mean, this is happening, and we have to do something. And I think that there's even other races who are people starting to back up the alt-right. I've been meeting them, and they're like, yeah, I see how this is going to benefit our people and my people in the end too.
Yeah, I have, and this isn't in my notes or anything. I have, I guess, like the whole issue of race. I don't even know if I should get into that. Like I feel like our situation in America is different from, like, say, the golden ones.
Oh, of course, of course.
Situation in Sweden, where Sweden has a long-standing history, where there's, for centuries, the state overlapped with an ethnicity.
That's right. I mean, this is different. The solutions for America would be much different than solutions for Europe. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'm just saying it's going to be trickier to work out particular policies in America, given that most of its history has been a melting pot for just wave after wave of immigration. I mean, its institutions are obviously European, but its demographic past is, by and large, quite mixed.
At least it was European, but now the wave of immigration that's coming in is not European. It was a European melting pot, and that's one thing I always look at America, look at what came, even though it was Europeans and it was great for a time. Then what happened? It turned into exactly this individualistic thing. It turned into burgers and movies and capitalism and materialism because we were uprooted and no longer connected to our tribe. So it became something really just blah and yucky and easy to infiltrate. And now that's what's happened.
Yeah, and it just seems like we're in this weird interim period of, I don't even know how to explain it, just where all cultural identity and racial identity is just being blurred and eradicated. I would like to think some new sort of identities emerging out of that, but once again, I think if it would take something like fascism to make that happen.
There's always resistance and there's always rebellion. And here's the thing. I think people say, oh, people have always mixed. And that's true organically, but not at this scale. Because now we're dealing with billions of dollars of propaganda aimed at white people to, mix yourselves out. It's for the sake of global peace and one world. And so it's a good thing. I think if there wasn't all this propaganda aimed on it, as many people wouldn't be doing this. But there's always going to be a resistance to it when the system is pushing this kind of stuff. There's always going to be people who are going to go the complete opposite. I think we'll probably see people getting so hardcore about like who they have kids with. They'll be like, "Oh, can I see your DNA test?" My husband and I joke around about this all the time. But that's where it might be going for a certain sector of people who will be diehards to preserve what they have.
Yeah, I can see it going that way. I guess I kind of view things, and I guess this wouldn't be that much of a surprise given the book that I'm increasingly becoming infamous for, perhaps. But I guess I look at things from a eugenics point of view often, and I guess I have this tendency. And I guess this is more relevant to our American situation here, but short of trying to unwind the clock and purify it on the populace on on European grounds, it seems to me like if we had some sort of national goal with standards in place for winnowing the populace and just dealing with the genetic material that we already have, and just sort of saying, okay, right now is T0, and we're rather than just having the reckless breeding that. I mean, I honestly, I think reproductive practices and the demand to have libertine reproductive practices is pretty much at the heart of the liberal agenda.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's the inner sanctum that you're not allowed to touch. Like if you want to be branded a fascist, you tell somebody who they cannot breed with.
Exactly.
Like that's. I kind of feel like that's at the heart of all of this, honestly.
Well, it's funny because they have all these ideas of National Socialists and they wanted to kill the blonde and blue-eyed people, which is all garbage. It's not even true. But they always make fun of the idea of, they wanted to have some kind of master race or whatever, and all these twisted, contorted views of that aren't accurate, of course. But now that they're trying to show that this kind of blended Brazilian human, this former European blended out with 5 other races is like, that's the master race. And that's okay to say it, right? As long as it's not white and European, it's okay to say that that's the new master race.
Yeah, right. So it's just a double standard at work. I mean, you can talk about these things so long as the European gets the short end of the stick.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Also, I wanted to ask you one more thing. I know we've been going a while, but the idea of, alt-right being a big tent, and I think it's been good to kind of filter out and recruit people to take them to the next level. I kind of see it as a big recruitment center. But what do you think about centrism?
Oh, right. Well, okay. Let me. That ties in. You had asked, well, in an email to me, Lana, about the concern about the pendulum swing. Mm-hmm. Because if the alt-right has this momentum going, what can we do to prevent it from just lapsing back into the same political poles that we've already had?
Exactly.
For decades. And that's a tough one.
Yeah,
I mean, I had to rack, but it's not as if I only have begun to think about it because of that nudging. But basically, it seems to me that is at the heart of what the new oligarchs, I would call them, have to do, which would be to sufficiently distinguish that which passes for both left and right today, so as to prevent what is essentially dialectically related to the opposition of political theories. So in order for it to retain its power, the alt-right would have to be diligent in its efforts to stand as a synthesis over and above left and right. And so what that means is, well, one thing it definitely does not mean is a movement towards centrism. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, centrism is merely reactionary. It's a lame, effete bid to diffuse that dialectical tension by pretending some sort of reconciliation.
It's the path of cowards, That's why I see some of these classical liberals are just cowards. They're afraid to take a hard stance in either way.
Right, and it may appear to be this higher position or something, but it's really just the result of cherry picking principles from both sides just in order to avoid conflict.
Yeah, I want to be friends with everyone, right?
Yeah.
It's easier because more people like me that way. That's what it's about. It's the easier path.
Yeah, and it fuels what I would consider just a petty bourgeois attitude that, while may be good for marketplace values, is not good for anybody who has anything more serious in mind for human destiny.
Yeah, exactly.
But so my idea here is that as a synthesis over and above left and right, it would be in much less danger of just swinging back to either left or right. And that the leaders, once that synthesis is formulated, it would be their task to safeguard that body against becoming what is antithetic to what they've created, which would be in danger of lapsing and dissipating at that point. So the alt-right as a new position, if it truly is an alternative to right, and I would say and to the left, it would have to stand forth in a way that presents itself in contrast to what it's evolved out of. So that brings me to the point of the need. I almost said usefulness, but really at that point it would become more of a need to develop some sort of regime identifying culture. So remember in our first interview, Lana, I said, "Oh, we can't let fascism just become a fashion show."
Yeah, exactly.
I still hold to that, but what I didn't mean by that is that fashion, so to speak, is irrelevant. I mean,
you mean you don't want it just to be a trend where it's here today and gone tomorrow. We want it to stick.
Right. But what I didn't mean to say is that there's no need for any ostentation or outward display. One thing that would bolster the hegemony of the alt-right would be to have our own culture, like our own forms
look.
of culture, pageantry, iconography, arts, the music.
And that's been happening. That's been taking shape organically. It's exciting to see that.
Yeah, something that when you see it, it's just obvious that it signifies what the alt-right is about. Symbols, and in doing that, the one side effect of having our own subculture like that is you're not wasting away and contributing to the liberal culture. The language cultivation would be another big one. Basically, propaganda in all forms. That word is not necessarily a bad thing. It just means to propagate our own cultural elements. It doesn't mean deception or anything
exactly.
like that.
Yeah, of course.
So, in a way, it's weaving a new spell in the way that culture does.
It's the most powerful weapon there is, and the other side has known that, and they've used it for sure.
Right. So I would see it. Yeah, right. I mean, it's effective for them. I mean, we should fight fire with fire, and it would. But with the difference though is that remember, I mean, they're using cultural forms basically for nihilistic ends, but we would be using it for the creation of a new world.
Exactly, and that's where they're going to lose. That is where we're going to win and kick their ass for sure, because we actually have something to offer. We actually have the edifying experience, the mystical experience, the journey, and the liberating aspect of it. They don't. They just have death and depression at the end of theirs.
Yeah. I mean, they're basically predicated on a disdain for what's higher, whereas what we would be about is a love for what's higher, to excel, to go beyond, to ressentiment, which is the driving pathos of the slave morality.
Yeah, see, it's exciting. Just talking about it gets like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. It's exciting. It's inspiring. See, and when you have something to inspire people, that's where you're going to win.
I hope so, because it seems like the degenerate aspect of humanity seems quite inspired, so to speak, to spread nihilism as far and wide as they can. But fortunately, we're not all that way. Some of us still have a spirit for growth and to create and to drive ahead. Some of us want to take humanity by the reins and do something, make a human destiny out of the human experience, not just negate everything, level everything, diffuse everything.
There's always been more losers than winners, so this is probably, our ancestors long ago probably had the same conversation in a different way, battling it in a different way. But Seth, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been excellent. I've really enjoyed it, and be sure to tell everyone how they can pick up The Glorious Path and any other details you wanted to share.
Yeah, sure. Our preferred way to attain the book would be through our website, which is oersterworks.com, OERSTRA.com, and or it is also available on Amazon. And there's an ebook version which you can find the link for on the website, or you could just go to Smashwords directly. And there's also an audiobook soon to be underway, because
Nice.
a lot of people have asked about that.
That's good. Yeah, that would be good. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Seth. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Talk again, Anna.
On the positive side, egalitarians are only getting weaker as we are becoming stronger. In the long term, we will win this war because nature and truth is with us. Remember to check redice.tv to find our latest live streams, TV content, and interviews. If you like what we do, please consider donating so that we can bring more people on board, including correspondents, behind-the-scenes help, and content producers. Go to paypal.me/redice. And of course, you can always become a Red Ice member at redicemembers.com to have access to all our content, including our weekend live TV show, Weekend Warrior, available just for members. Thanks for listening and being a part of what we do. Have a great night.